Hello. Hi everybody. My name is Stephen Murphy, and we have 30 minutes to solve global cannabis and regulations, which should be doable on a Friday evening. Look, I think it's very nice to be able to talk about beyond the war of drugs and to kind of, one, recognize the impact that has been made in the last 7 years, especially coming out of North America, which is now transferring over to Europe. But, we're in a crazy young industry, which we are kind of, to use an analogy, we're flying a plane with both hands tied behind our backs. Look, there's a recent major UN report that came out during the week, which called for an end of the war on drugs, and it sounds great and it sounds super positive, but really, when you translate the social mission of ending the war on drugs into the reality of conducting business and actually working to bring a business face to drugs and make it more agreeable and certainly more professional. Like, how we talked of conscious investment. How do you do that? How do you get investors excited about ending the war on drugs and that part of the story for businesses? Maybe Aaron, if you want to kick it off.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's all about aligning self-interest with the cause of ending prohibition, and what we're seeing in across the country is this emergent legal cannabis industry that investors are seeing like as an opportunity, like any other opportunity. And so what we're the gospel we preach is that if you're invested in this industry, then you are an advocate, and you must invest in the federal policy or state, federal, international policy reforms necessary for the industry to prosper.
Yeah, I mean, I would add to that there's not always an alignment between the self-interest of a particular business and good policy. So if I am Joe's megacorp, I want Joe's megacorp to have a monopoly on cannabis, which is terrible policy. So there's what I notice is that there's friction with especially like the larger companies, larger investors, with wanting to have market dominance versus what I think many would argue is better policy, which is an ecosystem of lots of smaller businesses that are doing things conscientiously, are paying attention to like environmental considerations, equity considerations, things of that nature. So I think the initial legalization effort, and whatever country we're talking about, you can get investors behind that concept. If I want to be in the cannabis space, it has to be legal in order for me to invest. If I have a bank that's going to finance that's going to be a variable issue in different places. If I have to answer to shareholders or a board of directors, those fundamental issues of legality are threshold issues. But once you get past that threshold issue of legalization, then it becomes more complicated, and what that legalization looks like itself also can become very complicated. And that's where you end up with like a lot of like limited markets. And we see this a lot in the States, particularly on the East Coast, where there is a set number of licenses, and what you have there typically are like the publicly traded companies that are publicly traded in Canada because they're not allowed to be publicly traded in the US that dominate these markets. And then the way that translates to the consumer is not very many options, and not very many especially good options. So they go to their local cannabis store and they have the options of like 5 different things that are in 20 different jars, and it's all pretty gross. So it's not exactly lined up very easily, I don't think. Fist bump for that one.
Wow, you guys really nailed it. I think that what's lost here in making something that is a magical, mystical unexplained, ethereal plant medicine into a consumer packaged good for capitalism, there's a natural disconnect. And I think that the people that I've seen do the most well, business-wise, success-wise in California, have been the ones that bake in a triple bottom line where they know that love is lucrative. Turnover in companies, lack of loyalty, bad quality products. There's proof of concept, there's data that shows that that does not scale markets, that does not welcome new users, that does not bring innovation and polish and sophistication to the space. And so we have proof that shows that if you don't invest in your people and the industry, people like NCIA, Aaron, works with the National Cannabis Industry Association, ask yourselves, are you part of a trade organization? Are you talking to each other? What happened in California, we fought like cats and dogs in front of the state capitol, in front of the federal capitol, and they looked at us. Of course they're gonna go with big pharma and big ag and big tobacco because we weren't on the same page before we showed up. We didn't have common language about what sustainability meant for us. And the people that are doing the best in the Bay Area and in LA and California are people who are giving back. When we use the word equity, we have a very, in the United States, because of our history with slavery and institutionalized racism and racist policy, we have what's called an equity program. So you might hear us talking about it a little bit. What we did was we put people of color and people from communities that were most highly policed by the war on drugs and by police, first in line to get licensing. In New Jersey, they have really unique, structures where they're actually getting business training. They're getting good loans, good rates on loans. They're getting deals on, rent, things that are really barriers to entry, to acknowledge that they have 400 years of being treated like subhuman beings, and they deserve a step up because many of their communities have been destroyed by the war on drugs, not only from policing, but from the fact that most, black fathers in urban centers are in prison. Those are all black children that are now being raised in the hood without any support. So the war on drugs has incredible implications that do mess with the economy, that do destabilize spaces and make cities unsafe. So these are the things that we try to talk about to these MSOs or to, Joe Corporation that don't know why it's important to care about it, that if you don't actively have in your marketing, in your budget, in your community, and in your staffing, an acknowledgement of the underlying racism and the underlying sexism and greed capitalism that has pushed us to where we are now, you actually won't do well. It hasn't really worked to be unabashedly greedy in the space. We don't like it as consumers, as B2B, and in general, the world is moving towards more conscious capitalism, so we gotta be on the right side of that.
I totally buy into, social equity and equity programs and that being a critical part of it.
But theory.
Well, the reality is very different. The reality and implementation of it is exceptionally different.
Yeah, we messed it up, by the way. We didn't do a good job at this. It's an idea.
well, talking about it, but it's also for a company who's trying to operate within the business, and then the challenges of running a business day to day, with the additional tasks of supporting a membership, and that membership just the constant pushing a hill up or pushing a rock up the hill. You've been scarred by what is a David versus Goliath task of not only pushing cannabis forward in the US, but doing so with so many vested parties who want to see cannabis ultimately fail. How do you convince companies to really embrace that? What's your message for them?
Well, I think in the U.S. we've evolved over time where there isn't the kind of the boogeyman of big pharma and tobacco really actively lobbying against cannabis. Not to say that they don't have interests that are in opposition to ours, but it's not a priority. The problem that we have is that the industry itself, especially the small operators, are not investing in the policy reforms that are needed. And so what's really important is, and to Joe's point, is that we can make this look really bad by having one or two of the largest companies push through national reforms that are favorable to them and no one else. But what the message that we have out there is that there is an alternative to that, which is making sure that the small businesses have a voice, making sure that we're creating a policy landscape that that raises all that raises all ships and ensures that we have an open and inclusive market, and that's that's what we do as an association, is represent those small businesses. But I think that you're going to see, yes, we're going to see big pharma and alcohol and tobacco. They're already playing in this space, but there's room for for craft cannabis as well.
Well, I think it's not as much oppositional. I think that they seek to co-opt it. I think that there certainly is investments from big pharma and big tobacco into cannabis, just not in a way that is conducive to having a healthy cannabis industry and in a way that's beneficial to consumers. It is with the sole focus of driving revenues to shareholders and not ideologically aligned with this plant that is beneficial and helps people therapeutically and should not be criminalized. And I think to your earlier question, the war on drugs is an awful thing. I spent a lot of my career in the trenches combating the war on drugs case by case, and I've seen how bad it is on families and communities firsthand. The legalization of cannabis does not fix that. And what Luna was describing was that we had decided, starting in California, but exported to other states in the US, to try to rectify the harms of the war on drugs by providing preferential treatment to applicants in local municipal permitting. And the reality, which you would think is obvious, but is lost upon many cities and counties and states, is that giving someone beneficial treatment in a permitting process does not correct the generational harms to society of the war on drugs.
But okay, so like you running a compliant business, great. You want to have a very strong social equity mission. Like I don't think anybody is in cannabis, for the wrong reasons. It's really it's unique.
I disagree.
And
I think there's a lot of people in there for the wrong reasons.
No, like
Majority of us love the plant, but there's some snakes. There's some snakes.
When you realize you actually have to work hard, like it scares a lot of people. So, but like once you get over that shock of this isn't going to be easy, the true green people come out, and it's a case of you're in the industry because you think this is something that can change the world in a very, doesn't have the solutions to absolutely everything, but
no one puts money behind it. To Aaron's point, if you're being regulated to death, why would you spend $10,000 a year to have them lobby for you? It's the self-fulfilling prophecy. No one has the money to lobby, and we don't have money because we have bad policy.
Sure, but you've got federal policy, which is one thing. But maybe is there any policy that you have seen that has enhanced or certainly been more favorable to find somewhat of the balance? Because I think a lot of people sitting here last year were licking their lips on the thought of adult use cannabis in Germany, only to see it being more watered down than ever. And that's going to happen, that's going to happen time and time again. This is as everybody says, this is a marathon, not a sprint. But there are policies that are being designed in certain states that are trying to find that balance.
No one has done it right. I think that I can look at globally, every jurisdiction that has sought out legalization has done a lot of things wrong. I think that I would invert that and say that there are bright spots in different areas where we should replicate certain elements of policy and deploy those and kind of Frankenstein it in other areas. So for example, Amsterdam. Amsterdam is the thought leader on this issue going back to the 1970s. And there's a lot wrong with how the Netherlands, and I say Amsterdam because, in large part, more broadly in the Netherlands, cannabis isn't as well tolerated as it is in Amsterdam, especially more recently with the government there. But point being, the social consumption aspect of coffee shops and being able to go to a business and consume cannabis and hang out is something that's special and unique and is not replicated in most other places. If you look in the US, by and large, the model is an off-sale model, like what you would get going to like a liquor store. You go and buy your product and you take it home and consume it. And that is not adequate for society to destigmatize this product. However, what they do poorly in the Netherlands is that the supply chain is not legalized or regulated. And so then you have this sort of like illicit supply chain that feeds into a quasi-legal model, and it can never really become mature, and it's just stymied, as it has been for the last 50 years or so. In California, one of the things that we did there that I don't know whether or not it can be successful is we did not limit the supply side, the production side. So there's no limitation by the state of California for how many cultivation licenses there can be or not be. Ideologically, I thought out of the gate, that's a good thing. Let's allow business to do what business does. The better businesses will outcompete the worst businesses. And through this process, like what we see with other industries, we will see the good businesses rise to the top and they will get the market dominance. But what has happened is that we've had a massive oversupply problem. And because we have created a system there where we allow for some municipalities to legalize and others to prohibit, in California still, several years after legalization, more than 65% of the state of California does not allow for legal cannabis, for commercial cannabis. And so then what you have is this massive oversupply that gets funneled into to the retailer, where there's just not enough retail availability for consumers. So consumers go to the illicit market, they go back to their dealer, and amongst other things, that local dealer, the person that they've known, that living room they've gone to, whatever, they don't pay huge taxes. They don't have all those added expenses, which makes the legal cannabis businesses ironically less competitive than the legacy folks that never bothered with legalization to begin with. So it's complicated, but what I would say is that you can look at some things about how California has done it. You can look at some things about how Canada has done it. One of the things that Canada has done well is federal legalization. For all of the problems with Canada, of which there are many, and I would say that the industry there is largely been a failure, at least there's federal legalization, and you can import, export in and out of Canada, and you can have access to banking, and that is something that is special. So if we look at sort of this like Frankenstein approach, we could imagine a model where there's a federal level of legalization, there is the ability for the consumer to go to a place and consume, and there are some guardrails in the supply chain to ensure both that there is not fully an oversupply, which I think that there's some larger debate there that we don't have time for now, while ensuring that the point of access for the consumers isn't so unduly restricted that people are basically compelled to go to the illicit market in order to have access to cannabis.
Or like in Australia, where I've heard that if you get caught driving, they can take your with cannabis in your system, they can take your license, and it puts the license of the prescribing doctor at risk. So then there's also the implementation, the devil's in the details a lot of times. Something I want people to realize too as we're talking about this, the word legalization doesn't mean anything. Don't use it. You're either talking about decriminalization or tax control and regulate. Because when in California, they thought they were legalizing, then they voted yes, they thought they were decriminalizing it for possession, use, transport, cultivation. What we were actually voting for was the consumer packaged good model that was sold through licensed dispensaries through the state. So there's two things happening here. You've got Portugal, Uruguay is a really interesting example. The question is are we talking about, is it good for business or is it good for the plant and medicine and medical sovereignty and human rights? Sometimes they're at odds, right?
Yeah, but I suppose this has to be kind of a universal conversation. This is, we're close or getting close to 80 countries around the world with some sort of legal framework for access to cannabis, predominantly medical. And that's not including the US. Like, there's every day there's a fresh wave of optimism for federal legalization, only to be jammed back in the can. There needs to be a major domino to fall. It's not going to be the EU, because they're not prepared to kind of rule on something so significant. It's highly unlikely to be the US. So it's essentially going to be a mishmash of federal policies, or international policies for each jurisdiction. Do you see any kind of, or suspect any change within the federal system for the next 5 years? Because that's the global domino.
Yeah, in the U.S., I mean, all of the action has been at the state level, and I'd argue there's been some positive to that, is that it probably has kept the big tobacco and big pharma at bay. But I think that in terms of seeing full regulation and control like alcohol at the federal level in the United States, that's still more than 5 years out. That's 5 or 10 years out. And there's a lot of factors on where who's elected next, and a lot of factors that are in play to make that prediction. But I do think what we will see in the nearer term will be what is called in U.S. law rescheduling of cannabis, kind of a medicalization that could provide it'll provide some relief for the industry on some levels, but comes with a whole other host of regulations. It would not affect international trade in any way. Most of our industry will still be out of compliance with federal law for quite some time. But that's probably going to be the next big move, short of other in terms of larger policy reform nationally in the U.S.
I'm seeing people really re-looking at their license caps. I think that we've seen that limited licensing is a real problem, to the point we just heard. I think that this is one of the most important things, is letting business do what it does. Part of that is allowing, not bottlenecking. So I think that having, the biggest thing is we were the consultants for the city and the state. When we were trying to push these things through in Oakland, they didn't know their own laws. We had to tell them how business worked. We were just talking in the green room about a lot of these policymakers and legislators, they don't have experience in business. They don't understand what an implementation of a business plan, what, shareholders like, the pressures. They don't know what, the devil ends up being in the details. So being at the table, knowing who these people are, is what I would recommend. I was on a first name basis with all of my city council members, my district representatives. They knew me, they knew my crew, they knew our argument. We showed up, we did cleanups in the community to show that cannabis was giving back. We donated in Berkeley. We were giving money to the libraries and the schools way before we legalized. This was pre tax control regulate. And when the cops would have an issue or we would have someone break in, the school teachers and the librarians would show up at these city councils and saying, actually, these people are contributing, and they would show up for us and fight for us. So I think that there's a little bit of making sure that you know who these people are, that they know you. In Brazil, you will go to a judge and ask their permission to grow cannabis. Imagine the societal change when the judge class, which skews typically more wealthy, more educated, more elite, are hearing hundreds of testimonials a day about why someone needs their medicine. This is the thing that's going to change hearts and minds. It's not going to be in the data. It's not going to be in the money. You can't quantify magic, and you can't quantify a community building and what this plant does. And I think that that's the most important thing, is we're not loud enough as consumers, as business people. We are not working hard enough on the policy side because we're so busy with our packaging, our branding, our social media content, our personal laundry and relationships if we have a life. So I think we need to put a lot more energy. What I noticed in California is when we were at the city council meetings, it was just business owners. There weren't many consumers. There weren't many other people arguing. And as a policymaker, if you see business people arguing for themselves, you just imagine that they're greedy and they just want what they want in their own business interest. They didn't realize we want the movement. We want medical safe access and recreational access. So who are you talking to? Do they know you? Are you at the table to tell them how you want it done? Because trying to undo and fix bad policy is way harder, more stressful, more expensive than baking it into the DNA from day one.
And there's a saying, either you're at the table or you're on the menu.
Facts.
And I would say, so I was doing parallel things to all the things that you just described. And sitting here all these years later today, it didn't make a damn bit of difference. The businesses that were there, that were champions at that time, they're gone. They don't exist. And the reason why they're gone and they don't exist and why it didn't matter is because there's overtaxation, amongst other things. And this is something that I think if we have a takeaway to impart on the people here and on policymakers in Germany and other places, it's to not look at cannabis as being a cash cow. Cannabis it's not going to solve a budget. It can't be overtaxed. Don't look at cannabis as providing any more revenue than any other business and any other industry in any other place. It won't do that. It's not going to fix these larger problems. It's not going to fix the war on drugs. It's not going to fix like larger epistemic things that have larger epistemic problems. So what it is it's an opportunity to end an abysmal and immoral policy of what we call the war on drugs, to incarcerate people for a beneficial plant that helps them and doesn't hurt anyone, that's never killed anyone ever in the history of humanity, has never caused a single death. That's all we're looking to do. We're looking to just fix that wrong and allow businesses to succeed and to allow people to use it and to use it fairly and reasonably freely. And the model that I think, if we're looking at it, one of the things that we haven't talked a lot about is the beverage model. What I think is going to work the best for cannabis is essentially what we see working for wine. There's a lot of parallels there. And in your home country, when you think about how is wine regulated, where can I access it, how much does it cost, what's required in order to get into the business, extrapolate that into cannabis. There's a way to do that. And I think that, just in how we're having this conversation, and we've been in the trenches since the beginning. We have a lot of battle scars here. We have been through it all, and it can be absolutely awful. And we can tell you a lot more of what not to do than what to do. Don't do what we did in California.
Please.
Don't do what we do in America. Don't do what has been done in Canada. The first model for legalization in Germany was shit. It was going to lead to monopoly, and it's not a bad thing that didn't pass. So I think that there is just an opportunity here for re-examination of a fundamental policy issue and to think about what can we do in order to make businesses successful, to give some benefit to communities and allow for safe access. Those are really the only things that are going to be accomplished.
Well, if we accomplish those alone, that's still something pretty significant. And then it comes down to judging, well, what is winning the war on drugs and what does that look like? Because I think if people want everything, it's not achievable. But I think that wraps it up. Yep.
See the flashing red light?
Yeah. But thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Stephen Murphy, Aaron Smith, Luna Store, and Joe Rogaway.